I was like out in my little farmhouse, like in my garden, and then like 5 minutes later, I'm doing press in the Philippines in, in my living room, and it was like,
This podcast is all about you and your journey in music, and we'll talk about the new record.
cool.
Sweet. I did see you're from Phoenix, Arizona. Were you born and raised there?
Yes, I was. Yep,
Talk to me
in the
about that.
desert. Well, Phoenix is very hot,
Okay.
as most people know. But yeah, I had a happy childhood. Um, my parents were very encouraging of every creative endeavor that I had. And yeah, I have fond memories of growing up in Arizona. I went to college in northern Arizona in a little town called Flagstaff,
Okay.
um, which was, Arizona is really funny because you can get like 2 hours from Phoenix and you have a completely different climate and setting. Flagstaff is kind of more like Colorado, I would say, in terms of weather. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Because I did read it's known for heat stroke and chimichangas.
Yeah,
Oh,
that would be Phoenix, but
not
yeah, no,
Flagstaff. Oh,
Flagstaff
gotcha.
is a little different, but yeah, I miss Arizona. I feel like when you grow up in the desert, all you want to see is green, and
Hmm.
then if you're away from it for a while, you're reminded of its beauty.
Sure.
So
I'm from San Diego. We'd go out to Arizona quite often, so I
yeah,
know the area a little bit.
cool.
Yeah. So, just where's the University of Arizona? Is that in Flagstaff, or am I thinking of a different spot?
That is in Tucson, Arizona, which
Tucson.
is in
Okay.
southern Arizona.
So, what school did you go to in Flagstaff?
I went to Northern Arizona University.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you go there for music?
Nope. I studied broadcast journalism.
Oh, sure. I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Very okay. Well, let's rewind a bit. So, how did you get into music originally?
I always loved being creative as a child, and I don't know, when I was a child I wanted to be an actor, and I took acting classes and went on auditions, and much to my mom's chagrin, she never wanted me to be involved in that industry. But um
But she'd take you anyway.
yeah, because I asked, and
I love
I
that.
yeah, and it wasn't something that obviously she forced on me or anything. But my point is, I've always been creative, and I always loved to sing when I was little. And when I was in junior high, I started to get involved in musical theater and choir. And when I was 13, I asked for a guitar for my birthday. And I started taking lessons, I think probably around like 14 or 15. And I had a guitar teacher when I was in high school that started encouraging me to write my own music, because he was basically like tabbing out songs that I wanted to learn,
Oh, sure.
and helping me learn them. So he was like, you could totally do this. You could totally write something on your own. And I was very hesitant at first. I had a lot of resistance for some reason. But when I started to try writing, it came very easily to me. And
Hmm.
I kind of just discovered this new passion. So, yeah, I started writing music when I was 18, which I think compared to a lot of people is kind of late.
Hmm.
Um, and it honestly was just a hobby. I don't think I ever envisioned it being a career. And I had put some music on MySpace back in the day. And at the time, my dad was working as a stockbroker, and one of his clients was this elderly woman who had started to have health problems. So her son took over her accounts, and
Her
my dad,
MySpace account?
no, her
I'm
investment
kidding.
account. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, so my dad was just talking to him one day and was like, "What do you do?" And he is a record producer in
Wow.
Nashville and a session musician. And my dad, being the the supportive parent that he is,
Mhm.
obviously parents are usually a little biased, but he's like, "I think my daughter has talent," and he sent him a bunch of stuff that I had recorded just like in my bedroom. And he really liked it. So I got the opportunity to make my first record when I was in college. And I came to Nashville to record. And I don't know, I just had one of those aha moments when I was in the studio and I was like, wow, I really, really love this. So that's kind of how it began.
Okay.
But yeah.
And that's not the record that you put out in 2019, right? This is a while back.
No, this is a record they put out in 2010.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering about that. Okay, so
Yeah.
2010 you put out a record in Nashville.
Yeah.
Did you came to Nashville to write the record?
No, I wrote the record myself. I just came to Nashville to record it.
To record it. Got you.
Yeah.
And you were in college at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
did you finish school, or at that point did it kind of take off for you?
No, I always wanted to finish school, so I
Okay.
did. Yep, I graduated early with a degree in broadcast journalism. I think I kind of discovered about halfway through my college career that actually wasn't something I wanted to do. But a lot of the skills I learned in college, I actually have used as a musician, which is that I worked for the radio station, so I learned how to operate microphones and sound, how to edit sound. I learned how to like use Final Cut Pro and all these things that, especially when you're an independent musician, which technically I guess I'm not anymore, but I used to be, you have to do so much of that stuff yourself. And so I actually feel like it was one of the best majors I could have possibly had. And it taught me how to be comfortable in front of a camera. And yeah, it was worth it.
And especially right now, right? I mean, you probably had to utilize a lot of those skills to stay almost relevant online or try to compete with everyone else online because no one's out touring at this point.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I went to school for the same thing. And that's interesting that you worked at the radio station at college, or did you have any passion to do that, or?
I enjoyed it, but I think I just knew that there's something about broadcast that I felt limited by creatively, especially like broadcast television, which I think I had originally thought that I wanted to do that because I was like, oh, I love writing. Oh, I like being on camera. I love being creative. This is a great combination of those things. And you're probably familiar with this, but writing for broadcast, for TV, is basically the blandest type of writing you could possibly do. You're just like trying to get to the point real quick.
Right. You got to keep people's attention real quick. Sure.
Yeah. And I just kind of discovered that there wasn't enough room for creativity for me there. But but in college, even though I was like, I would like to try music, I think I'm a careful person in a lot of ways. And I was like, I should have a backup. I want a degree just in case this doesn't work out. So, yeah.
That's nice. Yeah. I felt the same thing with television, and I liked radio because there was a little bit more freedom. But then when I worked for a corporate station, that freedom was gone. It was out the window. And it was like, you're only going to talk for this long and you got to shut up after that. And then I worked for an independent station for a lot of years in San Diego, where it was, for a while, they were really cool about letting you kind of be yourself. And I felt like there was something to be said about that. And then you can be more creative. And I love that. But when it started to constrict again, it was like, okay, this isn't for me. And I could totally see where you're coming from with that. At least, with your music, you can do whatever you want, right?
To some extent, yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that.
So once this producer, record executive kind of got his hands on your album and you go record it in Nashville, what's the next thing that you do?
Yeah, so let's see. I think I made 2 or 3 albums with him. And I signed with a manager that he had affiliation with. Shortly after that, soon after that, I moved to Austin, Texas, and I started playing music in Austin. First, I started off at like little listening rooms and coffee houses, and then I started playing with a band. And towards the end of my time in Austin, I just kind of realized that I needed to be somewhere with some more industry at the time, and actually now too. The ladder that you can climb in Austin just kind of has an ending, basically.
Sure.
If you don't leave. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed my time there. Austin is a really creative music scene, and a lot of people just make music and play music there for the joy of it, which I think is, you can tell. And I don't know, I got great practice there, learning how to play with a band and manage personalities and whatnot.
Sure.
But yeah, so at the tail end of my time in Austin, I started working with licensing companies, and started writing some more tailored music for licensing and sync, and also having my artist stuff be pitched for those purposes. And when I moved to Nashville, I had a different manager who was based in New York, and she had some connections with some publishing companies, and she started setting me up basically on rights with people for more like television and sync or pop-based writing. And that's how I got introduced to Big Yellow Dog, and ultimately signed a publishing deal with them in 2016.
Wow.
Yep.
When you write for sync or for television, is it a different like hat you have to put on as far as like when you're writing? And is that difficult to kind of switch when you're doing that as far as your songwriting goes?
It's a completely different exercise, I feel like, especially because I'm a type of writer and artist just on my own that really loves words. I guess that's like the emphasis is always on the lyrics. And so when you're writing things with the intention of synchronization in mind, you have to remember that your song is supposed to enhance a scene without distracting from it. So it's a very different type of writing. And no, I don't find it hard to switch back and forth because I've compartmentalized things pretty well. I have some alter egos that I make different types of music under, and I know like who they are and what their personalities are, and what kind of like what their sonic landscapes are. So I think that it was actually an easy transition for me, because I have a separation between like my sort of sacred art that is mine and this other thing that I do. And I think people often run into problems when they don't have that separation, I think.
Well, with a song like, I mean, you had a huge song recently that was onto, the Netflix show or movie. And was that a song that you had just written because it was a song you felt like, right? I mean, you wrote for yourself and that became this big thing, or was it kind of wrote to pitch?
It was written to a pitch. Yeah.
Oh.
So I received a brief from the music supervisors through my publisher, and it was very, very vague. So it was like, hi, we've got this new romantic comedy. I didn't know the name of it. I didn't know really anything other
About
than
it.
Yeah, they like included a couple keywords that they were looking for and a feeling that they were looking for. And my collaborator and I, Quinn Redmond, that day, we just kind of used that as a guidepost for what we made. And I think the song became something emotional and honest when we sort of inserted like anecdotes from our lives in there. But basically what happened was that song was pitched to the music supervisors, and it was on like their short list, I think, for a while. And then once they chose it, we worked with them for almost, I think, like a year and a half, tailoring it to the movie. So
interesting.
It was actually quite different from a lot of other things that I do, where it was really specifically made for that movie. And there are actually 3 versions of it on the soundtrack. One of those versions is a cover by a band called the Greeting Committee, so they did like their own thing. But there's like a pop version essentially in the movie at the end of the film, and then there's it's called like I think it's called the Always and Forever version, which is a more kind of cinematic version.
The acoustic version?
Yeah, it starts out acoustic and then it has like a big string arrangement towards the end. And that one, especially, like we saw the footage in the film and specifically made choices to tailor the song to enhance that footage.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I know sometimes that, you know, music supervisors will just grab a song that they think works.
Yeah, and that happens probably like 99% of the time. So this is a very different scenario. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, I'm curious to know, when you got signed to this publishing company in 2016, were you still writing records as, you know, under your name and putting out like EPs or anything like that, or records, or was it at that point kind of you just pivoted to more of the pitch world?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So when I signed with them, they specifically knew that I was both an artist who just made sort of pure art and also was interested in this other lane. And so it wasn't one or the other. They signed me for both.
Okay.
And Big Yellow Dog has a label division. And so I was able to make my personal art under their label division. And yeah, so I kind of have like these multiple personalities, like I mentioned before, that I make music under, and some of them have found a lot of success in the sync world, which I'm very grateful for. But some of that music was like the impetus basically for my deal. So it's pretty cool.
Okay. Tell me about these alter egos. I know you have one that you have a little cheesecake, but tell me about the one that has a lot of the sync deals.
Yeah. Her name is Hael.
And
when I'm Hael, I dress completely different. I wear a black wig and a nose ring and leather. And she's kind of like my, I don't know, more edgy, cooler, dark side.
Right.
Yeah, and I changed my voice pretty significantly when I'm Hael. I sing differently than I do as Leah. And Hael is actually just an artist in a way. You know, I do some kind of more art-centric things for Hael, and then I also do more tailored things for Hael based on, you know, certain opportunities. But I feel very grateful she's found a nice lane kind of in the ad world, and it's super fun. And it's like I mentioned before, part of the reason why it's so fun is that I have a distinction between who she is and the music she makes and who I am. And that has allowed me just a tremendous amount of creative freedom.
I find it interesting that you wanted to be an actor kind of growing up, and now you almost get to do that in both worlds, in music and, you know, as Hael, you get to portray a totally different personality.
Yeah, it's so fun. My dad made a comment recently. When I was little, I used to dress up a lot as like characters, and I would make videos with like the old VHS cameras and edit them on
VCRs,
some really early software on my dad's like PC. And he said something, he's like, you know, you were always dressing up and playing characters, and now you're still dressing up and playing characters. So yeah, it's kind of like a full circle moment.
Sure. When was Hael born? Like, do you remember, again, how did you pitch that to your label or your publishing company? You're like, hey, I've got this great idea. And you just show up in a wig and a nose ring, a leather jacket.
So like the physical persona really came later. So before I signed my deal, I had just like started writing with more people. And I basically wrote this song that Big Yellow Dog loved. But I knew that it wasn't for me. Like it wasn't, it would be really confusing for people who consumed my music, if I didn't have these different characters, because of what I mentioned before, which is that the like style of that song was radically different from the Leah Nobel stuff. My voice
Mhm.
sounded different. It was processed differently. And so I just came to them and I said, hey, I think I'd like to create an alter ego. And that was like the first song as my alter ego, because it really didn't feel like it belonged to me personally.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, Hael is just Leah reversed.
Oh, good point. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, most people don't, but yeah. So that's kind of how I came up with that name.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Little Cheesecake. How did Little Cheesecake come about?
Yeah, Little Cheesecake came about because once again, I was just writing for fun, kind of writing without an agenda. And I just made a totally insane song that sounded way different from Leah or Hael. And I was like, well, this is something else. And Little Cheesecake is really like a place for my sense of humor, I would
Mhm.
say. Her songs are like very left field pop. I call them like brat rap, I guess. I don't know if that's a genre or if I just created it, but
Sounds like a good genre.
yeah, yeah. And then it was a joke in high school. I remember people would be like, "What would your rapper name be?" And mine was Little Cheesecake. So that's that's how I made that choice.
Was there a lot
And
of Lils around at the time when you created this name, or was it really just Lil Wayne? Because he kind of birthed like
no,
7,000 plus Lils online,
yeah,
right?
yeah, totally. I mean, Little Cheesecake was only created maybe like, I don't know, 4 years ago, 3 or 4
Okay.
years
So
ago.
there's still a plethora of
Oh
Lils
yeah.
out there
Oh
at the
yeah.
time.
Probably not the wisest choice for a name, but honestly,
But I don't think there's another Little Cheesecake.
no, I don't believe so. So I feel fortunate about that, and yeah, it's really just like, I don't know, something that I have in my professional career and my life that just brings me a lot of joy,
Hmm.
and I feel very fortunate to have those things. So it keeps things interesting and fun.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're funny. Let's be honest. Like right when I was reading your bio, the fact that you put home of
Oh,
heatstroke and chimichangas, I was like, okay, this is funny. And then further down the line, I realized that you did improv comedy. Was that something that you
yeah.
picked up later? Was that something you were always interested in, like growing up?
Yeah, so I started doing that as a hobby when I lived in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I just totally fell in love with it. And I started performing in Nashville as well with a company called Third Coast Comedy. And before the pandemic, I was doing tons of shows and rehearsals and stuff. But yeah, improv, like, I don't know. I would recommend it to everyone, especially people who struggle with stage fright or being shy,
Hmm.
which actually that's a component of something that I struggle with. So it's really good for me. It's like therapy.
And are you in Nashville now? Are you still in?
Yeah, so I actually split my time between Nashville and Eastern Tennessee. So
Oh, okay. So
yeah,
you're in Tennessee now.
yeah, I'm in Tennessee. We live in this really old farmhouse in the country in East Tennessee, and that's where I am now, because my fiance is going to medical school.
Wow.
So yeah, well, I still have a place in Nashville, and I really kind of bounce back in between depending on where I'm needed. But
Okay.
I will say that the pandemic, um, changed the structure of collaboration in a lot of ways, and I pre-pandemic, I already knew that I'd be splitting time between these two locations. But
Hmm.
I thought that I would have to be in Nashville to collaborate, and that when I was in East Tennessee, I would have to do production on my own, and it would just be my personal stuff.
Hmm.
And it's been cool because I can collaborate with people in person, but I can also collaborate remotely because the
Sure.
pandemic taught us all how to do that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it different? I'm sure it's different, but explain to me how you feel about doing co-writes over Zoom.
I feel two ways. For people that I had a relationship, a creative working relationship and a rapport with pre-pandemic, working over Zoom is really easy. And sometimes a producer will just text me something and we don't even get on Zoom.
Oh,
So
sure.
he'll like text me a track, I listen to it, I'll write the lyrics, I'll do vocals, and I send it back. And then he's like, cool. And then I send him the stems. So that's super easy.
Right.
Now, that's not everyone's cup of tea. Like, some people, I think a lot of times when I work with producers, we kind of lean into, we give each other space in the lanes that we shine best in. And that is what I believe to be kind of the most productive use of my time. But sometimes everyone's craving more collaboration. So sometimes I'm on Zoom with someone and we're sending ideas back and forth, and there's kind of like a plug-in for DAWs. It's called Audio Movers. So you can stream, kind of like live stream the audio that you're working on, so there's no delay via Zoom. So
cool.
Yeah, sometimes it looks like that. I will say I do feel challenged sometimes when I'm working with someone new over Zoom, because we don't have that relationship history when we enter the right. And sometimes there's like technology problems and, just some awkwardness perhaps.
Right. Is it hard to vibe with somebody that you're not in, sometimes that you're not, in the room with, or over this?
Yeah,
okay.
It can be. It's kind of like, I find that collaboration in general is very similar to dating.
Sure.
So it's like, sometimes you meet someone and you're like, okay, I could work with them again. And then other times you meet someone where you're like, wow, we have this like crazy synergy, And then sometimes you collaborate with someone that you're just not a fit. And it's nothing personal. It's just maybe you have different tastes. You have different ways of working. Your personalities don't mesh. So I feel pretty fortunate. I have had, I didn't come from like co-writing culture. So when I started making music and writing music, it was always a solo endeavor. And I still do a lot of solo writing, and I love doing that. But I actually really enjoy collaboration, especially when it's one of those like synergy people where
Sure.
we just really speak each other's language, and we can kind of like lean into what our strong suits are, which is fun.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, my family and I, we just moved to Nashville like about 6 months ago, or less than 6 months ago. We moved in the midst of the pandemic.
I feel your pain. I moved to Eastern Tennessee during the pandemic, and it was a really strange period of time. So
we came from San Diego, Southern California, which was like totally, it was just a different world. Yeah, moving here. But we love it here. It's amazing. It's so cool. Yeah.
Happy to hear that.
Yeah. I'm curious about this, this record you put out with all these interviews, Running in Borrowed Shoes. Like, how did this concept come up? And tell me tell me about this.
Yeah. Well, I will say that that's probably like the best thing that I've ever done in my life, and something that I just enjoyed tremendously making. It's kind of what I mentioned before, which is like I keep my endeavors pretty separate. So that was definitely like a pure artistic Leah Nobel endeavor that didn't have really any other agenda than just that. And
did you know going into it, that's how you wanted to approach it? Like, I'm going to interview a bunch of people and then kind of write a song.
Yeah. So basically the idea was conceived because there's this expectation, especially currently, I feel like TikTok has kind of enhanced this problem, which is that we expect creatives or artists to be like content creators who basically have to generate an endless stream of content and songs. And what happens sometimes is that push for just like endless music, which is also kind of like a side effect of streaming, I think, means that sometimes you don't live in between writing. Like you're you haven't lived life almost, because you're just constantly like in this bubble of creation. So I was
Mhm.
kind of at that point where people were encouraging me to make another record, and I just didn't feel very personally inspired.
Mhm.
And I also I write fiction all the time, so that's a chunk of what I do is completely fictional. But I wasn't really fired up about just writing a record full of fiction, and so I sort of got this idea to, you know, when you see a film and it's like based on a true story. I think I
Right.
was like watching something and I was like, oh, I just had like a light bulb moment. And I was like, what if I make a record that is sourced from other people's experiences? And you know, with a journalism background, there were all these little things that, you know, piqued my interest. I was like, oh, and then I got the idea to interview people, and then I was like, how many people should I interview? And I needed a solid number to really get like this landscape of human experience. And I tried really hard. I mean, some of the interviews that I conducted were random. So I would go to like the YMCA or a library or some sort of public space with like a sign basically that said, come talk to me. I'm interviewing people on.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. So I would say probably like 70% of my interviews were generated randomly. And so I didn't have as much control over like how diverse those interviews could be, but they sort of ended up being diverse anyway, because I would go to different places where, you know, different types of people were basically.
Right.
And then some other like perspectives were really important to me to get. So I went to like a veterans association. I interviewed people at a senior living center. I purposefully interviewed some children, refugees, etc. So I tried my hardest to get like a really great sampling, age wise, you know, socioeconomic background wise,
Mhm.
everything, because I was just really interested in, you know, having that sort of diverse landscape. But something that you learn when you do that is that even though our life experiences may be different in a lot of ways, it's like we're all kind of worried and consumed by the same things. Truly. Like
Mhm.
there's like four human stories and they just go on repeating themselves.
Interesting.
So yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Would you ask the same questions to each person, or did you kind of build the conversation like we're having right now?
Yeah. I had like a list of questions, and some of them were borrowed from this article in the New York Times that came out years ago.
Mhm.
And I think the article is called "100 Questions to Fall in Love." And they are specifically designed questions to like bypass small talk, which was really important to me.
Sure.
So, like, I definitely had questions prepared, but I also like was following the flow of the conversation and kind of inserting them where they made sense.
Right.
Um, but yeah, one of the questions I would often lead off with, which sometimes really stunned people, and they were like, "Oh, okay, this is like
This is
I'm going
happening.
deep." Yeah, I'd be like, "What do you want people to not know about you?"
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, and yeah, so basically, I the record took me almost 3 years to make, um,
Wow.
and part of the reason why that happened was I had a totally different manager in the beginning who had a different idea of how to make this thing come to life, and that kind of didn't come to fruition, and I had to find new ways, you know, to make this come to life. Um, so yeah, I interviewed 100 people, and then I transcribed all my interviews as if I were them. So instead of saying like Mary told me about her daughter who passed away, it was like my daughter passed away. So that was like the moment where the transfer occurred. I feel
Mhm.
like between, instead of me like um, kind of writing about people's lives from a distance. I feel like even though, like, let's be honest, like, even your best attempt at like pure empathy, you're still viewing your life through your lens, even if you really try not to. You
Right.
are,
Right.
but that was really like my best attempt at trying to write from someone else's perspective as if I were them based on what they told me. Um, so yeah, and then as I was transcribing, I was also writing songs, and I wrote 30 songs for the record,
Wow.
and they were kind of sourced in different ways. So some of them are like about reoccurring themes from my interviews, like the topics that came up the most.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of them are like more direct translations of a specific story, and some of them are stories combined. And so they're not all like direct narratives. Some of them, are more thematic, but um, yeah, it was a tremendous experience. I put on a really special show for Running in Borrowed Shoes that was kind of like a TED Talk and a concert combined, and the
Mm-hmm.
audience was really involved in this special way. Like, one of my favorite parts of the show was that when people entered the door, they were given one of my questions that I asked in my interviews. And we asked everyone to write an answer on a sheet of paper, and that was put in an envelope. And before like the corresponding song was performed, these envelopes were passed out, and everyone in the audience got to read someone else's answer.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like really tremendous. It was
What a
amazing.
big, yeah, what a cool
Yeah,
what a cool concept. Everything about that record, I love the idea
thanks.
behind it. I've never heard anything like that. It's
Thank
so
you.
creative. Um, was it hard to get people to open up to you?
No,
Really?
it wasn't, because I think, you know, there's a couple things at play. One, most of the people I interviewed, not all, but most of them were strangers. And I do feel like people feel safer telling something to a stranger than they do someone they know.
Right. Why do you think
Yeah.
do you think that's because they're not going to run into you again and you're not going to judge them, or is it
I
like,
think it's a judgment thing. It's a
okay.
safety thing. Yeah. And also, I don't mean this in a negative way. This is just part of being a human being, but most of us like to tell our stories. And
Mhm.
we like when someone is interested, And so I honestly felt that the most when I interviewed people who are living at the senior center. They were just so emotionally touched that someone who was young was interested in learning about their lives, and their lives were amazing,
Mhm.
And sometimes people would say like, "Oh, like I don't have anything interesting to share, or I don't have, a sad story." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not looking for that. I'm just looking
Right.
to know you." And yeah, so
That's so
that's pretty
cool.
cool.
So
Yeah.
people's lives fascinate me, and that's like why I really wanted to start this podcast. Was really curious on how people got to where they are, as far as like making
Yeah.
it in the industry. Because I was always a fan of music growing up, and always wanted to be in a band and rock star. But I knew that wasn't ever going to be achievable for me because I just wasn't. That wasn't my
Yeah.
gift, so to speak.
Yeah, I
So I made
understand.
it myself. I could do the entertainment aspect of it as a radio personality and like
Yeah.
got to do it this way. But just learning about people and how they achieved things, because everyone has a different story and it's always
Oh yeah.
interesting to hear. And a lot, but like you said, there's like four recurring themes. I haven't noticed that I wouldn't be able to pin a number down, but talking to a lot of different artists, I've done like over 700 of these interviews, and
Right.
hearing similarities in a lot of people's stories is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so cool that you were able to do that. Did you record them all, or is it all? So you had like a tape recorder or something, and then were these people? Did they know that they're going to be kind of anonymous?
Yeah, so I did record them all. I recorded them on my phone, just in my voice memos app, and
Uh huh.
everyone had to sign a consent form. So they knew that they were going to be anonymous and their information was protected, but they had to sign a form that said I could use inspiration from their interview for a song. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it was a really special project, and there were many moments that I was like, this is never going to get made. And I'm just so happy. Like, sometimes I will be rummaging through my closet looking for something, and I like come across a couple of CDs, and I just like hold it in my hand, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that I made that. Because uh, before this, I had this conception about myself that I wasn't a diligent person. And I don't know where that came from. I think I like thought, oh, I can't stick to an exercise routine. Like I must not be diligent. And now in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, uh, no, that's not a good example of whether you can stick with something or not. But I was
Right.
really proud of
Most
myself.
people can't stick to an
Right?
exercise
No,
or a
no,
diet. That's why everyone
no.
at the beginning of the year it's always like, all right,
Yeah.
clean slate.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I had this like belief about myself that, I couldn't do something that was such a massive undertaking. So in a lot of ways it was just, yeah, it was a very like redeeming, powerful experience for me to know that I could do something like that. And I didn't really have, I mean, I collaborated with a producer when we recorded the record, but I didn't really have any guidance, and I didn't have anyone motivating me to get stuff done. So I feel proud of myself that I was able to do that.
Yeah, and anyone really kind of chiming in and saying, "Oh, well, you should take this guy's story because it's very like you, I don't, it's like you're gonna
No.
pick and choose what you want to pick and choose."
Yeah, and I got to choose the song. Like I had input obviously from my publisher and team and
Right.
stuff about what was going to go on the record, but ultimately it was my choice, and that was really cool to have full creative control and have control over pretty much everything. So
That's
it was
huge.
awesome. Yeah.
I love you have this video on your Instagram. Maybe it's on your TikTok too, but I saw it on your Instagram where you're like, here's an exercise, like you're like flipping through a magazine or something, and you point
Oh
it,
yeah.
and you're like, I think you're like, remember, okay, that's the word. And then you write this beautiful song or piece of a
Yeah.
song just off that one word. Is that something that you do quite often?
Um, yes and no. Sometimes I
Okay.
do that just as a challenge to myself. Like when I was talking about those lulls where you're like, I don't feel like I have anything to write about today. I feel like
hmm
doing little exercises like that are kind of fun. But it's also just something that I do on social media as, you know, it's what I said before, which is like there's this constant pressure to always be on social media as an artist and be this
hmm
like to churn out this content. And for me, like, um, I have to figure out how to be on that platforms in a way that A feels authentic, but also doesn't make me hate them, the platforms. So
Right.
I'm just like, how can I have fun? Like, how can I be myself? And so I do those things kind of just for fun. Um, but yeah, I'm not very good at faking it, I guess.
Right.
So
But I think it's very easy to see if someone's faking it or not, and
yeah,
you can tell if somebody's just trying to jump on the whatever trend is being successful online at that moment.
right,
So
yeah,
the people that make it and the people that create these viral videos aren't emulating something that had already happened 90% of the time, I would say.
yeah, usually not.
So, well, I'm curious to know well, you wrote beginning, middle, and end. Was that pre-pandemic or were we in the
Yes,
midst of it all? Okay, so that was.
yeah. So like it was written pre-pandemic, and then I think it was written in 2018, which is nuts.
Wow.
I know. And then we spent 2019 working with the music supervisors. And so they came out from LA to Nashville, and we met them and saw footage. And a lot of that work fell more on Quinn because he, produced the song, and it was a lot of like little sonic changes and additions and subtractions. And when you
Sure.
have like more cooks in the kitchen, it definitely is a longer process. But then like the film was supposed to come out. I don't know if it was supposed to come out in 20. No, it wasn't supposed to come out in 2020 because the second movie came out in 2020. But I think it was supposed to come out like earlier than it did. But things did get pushed back because of the pandemic.
Okay.
because they still had like things to shoot, I think, when production shut down. So it was a very long process, and I've said this before in interviews, but so films have so many people involved, like more so than television shows, I feel like.
Oh yeah, you watch the credits and it's like 17 minutes of like people's
Right.
names.
And so it is very likely when you have a song placed in a film that it will get cut, because like a film changes so much often in a span of time. You have
Mm-hmm.
so many cooks in the kitchen and so many opinions, and like it can easily be like one day the director's like in a different mood and they're just like, oh yeah, let's just like scrap all this.
Yeah.
So during that whole process, I was kind of, I don't want to say I was apathetic because I certainly wasn't, but I was like trying to have not as much emotional attachment to that experience and the outcome, because I was like, even though we're custom tailoring this and it seems like this is going to be it, I just knew that there was a possibility that someone could change their mind. So it was like a pleasant surprise when we're like, what, 3 months out from the movie coming out. I was like, okay, I think it's going to stick, you know? Um, so yeah, it was a very long process, and I honestly had no idea. I think, I mean, I was familiar with those films, but I didn't quite know, I don't know, the nature of their following, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and how emotionally invested people are in those characters. And so it was a really cool experience to sort of watch as the film was released, how that song was, I don't know, really associated with people's emotional investment in the story. So
And how big the song became. I mean,
yeah,
it has I think I looked earlier on Spotify, it's like 24 million streams. Like
yeah, yeah,
you said it was, top Shazam song and like surpassing like Olivia Rodrigo, who is like
right,
anything she does right now is like the biggest
yeah.
thing on there. And
It
that's
was
so
really weird.
huge.
Yeah, it was weird because, I've always been kind of a more underground artist. And
Mm-hmm.
so my following, I mean, everything's relative, right? Or subjective, I guess. But my following was like relatively small. And, I put on like small, quiet shows. And, so to have something like that happen was pretty crazy. And it was also strange because of the timing of when it happened, which was like,
Mm-hmm.
because of the pandemic, just a lot of things were limited. Like you couldn't celebrate with people in the same way. And I probably would have gone to the premiere if I was, if it was
Oh yeah, that was
a
taken
different
from you. I didn't think about
universe.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really emotionally hung up on that, but the strange thing is it felt like everything that was happening was just happening in my phone. Like,
Right.
because, my life, I was like out in my little farmhouse, like in my garden. And then, like, 5 minutes later, I'm doing press in the Philippines in my living room. And it was like so strange. Like, I don't, it was a very bizarre experience because, like, nothing felt tangible, I guess. It was all
Hmm.
just like in this other internet world. So it was very bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about that being because your life physically hasn't really changed much. You weren't like going to these premieres and doing
No,
these things and playing these
no.
huge shows. It's like, yeah, all these huge things are happening and millions of people are hearing my song, but I'm just still sitting here in my house, in my
Yeah.
garden.
Yeah. Yeah. It was strange, but I'm very grateful for that experience, obviously, and
Mhm.
um for the boost. So it
Sure.
was cool.
Well, tell me about this new EP you recently released, Love, Death, etc.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to release some music that kind of felt a little bit like a stepping stone for people who enjoyed beginning, middle, end.
Hmm.
Because even within kind of the music I make under Leah, I think stylistically things can be pretty different. Like, I think my music can be kind of more indie and weird sometimes, than beginning, middle, end. So I wanted to release some more music, but I didn't want to give people whiplash. And so a lot of my records are kind of like, I feel like maybe more of a hybrid between folk and pop sensibilities. And I feel like this little EP is kind of more in it's still like a left of center pop thing. I don't feel like it fits in like a top 40 category or anything like that. But sonically, it's like kind of this dreamy pop moment. And the record was named just for basically the themes of the record. So yeah, there's a couple songs about love or lust, and there's a song about trying to process somebody's death, and then there's etc. is just a wide category, but I felt like there's kind of a song about overthinking on the record, and that's what I felt like fell in that category. But yeah, it was fun to kind of experiment with some different sounds, and a couple of those songs were written a long time ago, so it's really cool to take something from the vault, reimagine it a little bit, and let it have a life, because it probably wouldn't have otherwise. So it was really cool.
And were the other ones written kind of recently or during the lockdown?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Clear My Head actually is the first self-produced song that I put on a record. So that's just something that I did. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's really
Thanks.
awesome.
Yeah.
And it's doing well. I mean, the
Yeah.
album's doing really well too. That's awesome.
I'm very grateful. So, yeah, I don't know, one of my most favorite things in the world is just making things, like the process of creating something. And so I try to have this mentality where all my joy and all my value rests in the making. And I really try not to have any emotional attachment for what comes afterwards. And of course, like, that's hard. You still do. But that's kind of a mindfulness practice that I practice to help save my mental health with like being in this industry. So I feel like everything else is extra. Like I love when people resonate with things, and I love getting messages from people who have listened to something and it means something to them. That feels really good. But I have to always put the emphasis in the making of it. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Leah, for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really nice to talk with you.
I have one more question for you. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Yes, I have a lot of advice, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, my number one thing would be to think about what makes you different and lean into that. I feel like the market is really, really saturated. And sometimes I get on Spotify and I listen to things and I feel like 50 different artists could have made that thing. It's kind of what we were talking about before, which is that, like, you know, TikTok is funny because I feel like on one hand, it like promotes insane creativity and it allows people to like be on an equal playing field. And then on the other hand, it promotes copying, basically.
Sure.
Right? Trends. And so that bleeds out everywhere. And so even though that's part of our landscape now, I really feel like people who know who they are as artists, like, I think that will give you the most satisfaction being in this business, if you are firm on who you are and you know sort of what makes you different and what your strengths are, and that you lean into those things. So it's hard because a lot of times that's not rewarded, or you have people in your ear telling you to not lean into those things, you know? But that would be one of my pieces of advice. And another piece of advice would be to have another job until you don't have to.
I like that.
Yeah, I think like, I think a recipe for being miserable is when you put so much pressure on your art to like feed you, basically. And like artistic industries don't operate like other industries. Like your hard work is not always rewarded. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just like creativity killer, I think, when you have that much pressure on your shoulders. Um, I've also found just in my personal life experience that I'm actually not more productive with more time. So I used to be like, oh, I only want a part-time job right now. Like when I had part-time jobs probably up until I signed my publishing deal, and then I was able to do this full time. But
Mm-hmm.
like I used to think, oh, like I can't have certain jobs because I'm not going to have enough time to work on my music. And while a part of that is true for me personally, I learned that I was more productive with the less time I had. So if I had like 7 hours in a day to write something, I would be almost less productive than if I woke up 2 hours early before a shift and I wrote something. Um, so yeah, I think I don't know, you'll have more peace in your life if some of your basic needs are covered, and then you have time to make art. Um, my third piece of advice would be just to try to form an honest community with the people around you. Um, Try not to make it a competition. Like, we all need each other so badly, and it's such a hard industry to navigate, and for mental health. And so I feel so grateful for the people in my life that also do this, who I can call like when I'm not doing well and I need advice or support, and they understand. Like, it's nice not to have those guards up and be able to have that community with people. So um, that's what I would say. Bringing it backwards.